back to Jay versus Horror. I'm your host, Jay Wall, and it's time for my horror story, part 2, The Terror Ring. So, why did I call this part The Terror Ring? Well, for two reasons. One, it's kind of a weird word and a little awkward to say, and secondly, this is a episode devoted to films that took me in a different direction in my horror education. This is a wave of films with a different tone. It's human beings doing horrible things to other human beings and causing them great physical pain. Now, up until this point, I'd seen a lot of monster movies, a lot of even Freddy and, guys who wore masks but didn't talk movies and, supernatural ghost films and all kinds of stuff like that I'd seen, even possession films, I think, at this point. But what I had not really noticed was this other sect of films that depicted the true dangers in the world, which, as we all know, are mainly human beings. So, I'm going to start this one out with a pretty popular movie and a little story I have about it. I was about, I guess, 11 years old. Silence of the Lambs came out February 14th, 1991. And this was just around Oscar season for that year, but it didn't qualify for the Oscars that year, and nobody had seen it. Uh, Once it came out, I mean, it did fairly good at the box office, but there were still mixed reviews for Silence of the Lambs. I remember watching, Ebert and Siskel and Ebert talk about it, and I think it was Roger Ebert who, or maybe it was Gene Siskel, one of them. Uh, I just remember them talking about the heavy-handed performance from Anthony Hopkins and how they felt like he hammed it up and all this other stuff. So I had no idea that it was such a great film at that point. Silence of the Lambs came out on video later that summer, and back then you had maybe 4 to 6 months before something went from theater to video, depending on how much money it made and how many times it ran or how long it ran at different theaters. But yeah, it hit that summer, and so it was a new release. And even though we had probably 3,000 videotapes, because my mom and dad were both movie freaks in their own separate ways, my mother, uh, I knew she liked horror, and I knew that she loved stuff like Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein. God bless her, she showed me every James Bond film repeatedly, and every Pink Panther film and all that great stuff. And my dad was more into stuff like Assault on Precinct 13 and Escape from New York and things like that. Lone Wolf McQuade, which I recently talked about. But so even though we had all those movies, still when the new releases would hit, I would ride my bike down to DJ's Pawn Shop and Video Village. Now that sounds like a horrible place, but trust me, this was a wonderland for a kid. It was literally the size of a giant barn, and inside, half the store was a video store and the other half was a pawn shop. And the guy had a crazy selection because he was a pawn shop. He'd been there for years and years, and everybody and their brother could sell their movies there for like, he would give you $2 for a movie, and they would bring their whole collection and just sell it. And it was a great place. He would rent anything that wasn't new. You rented 7 movies for 7 days for 70 cents a piece, which was a cool deal back then. You could go in there and get 7 old movies and just go home and watch them. They also even rented like top loading VCRs and stuff for people that didn't have one. And but yeah, they had a new release section, and so I was always down there every Tuesday because that's when the movies hit where I was from anyway. And we or I would go in and head straight after school and hit that new release section and try to get the good stuff, right? And so I go in and I knew Silence was coming out that day, but I wasn't sure. Like, it wasn't even the movie that I was there to get that day. I couldn't even tell you the other film that I was more excited about seeing, to be honest with you. But I picked it up as a secondary, and went up there and rented them and rode back home and watched the other movie first, which I still don't remember what it was. And then that night, I remember putting in Silence of the Lambs and watching it for the first time and just being blown away by how great of a film it was, how great the performances were in the film, and just everything about it. I loved it. there's such a mess to that story, and it's such a great story that I could talk about it forever. It's amazing that they were able to make a great film, considering how terrible the production was of the film and how contentious it was between the actors and director and the studio and everybody. And but yeah, the movie was amazing though, and this is something that happens a lot now, but people wouldn't understand that it wasn't like that at all back then. Now, when it gets Oscar season, there's screeners for the movies, and they'll leak those online, and everybody and their brother will, watch the movie because that gives the movie hype, and helps them sell it. And but back when I was a kid, they didn't have screeners like that, or if they did, you didn't have access to get a hold of them like they do now. And so when Silence came out on video, it was kind of like that type of feel. It had almost like a screener feel where everyone was getting to see this really cool movie, and it just built more and more hype and more momentum until it got to the Oscars. And as we know, it won everything. Jonathan Demme wins Best Director, Anthony wins Best Actor, Jodie wins Best Actress, and the film itself wins Best Picture. So yeah, it was a crazy thing because it was one of those movies. It was one of those times where when you see something for the first time and you're like, wow, I have to immediately tell everyone I know to go watch this right now. And I am so happy that I just saw this. So yeah, it was one of those times. But it was also one of the first times I remember seeing that type of movie where it was, just human beings, going after other human beings and it having that kind of an effect on me. I think Silence sent me off in a couple different directions, and one of them would be like the psychosexual films that came out around there, the early to late '90s, and then there was even a few in the '80s, like Fatal Attraction and stuff like that. So that's where it sent me, was watching those films, and so I got a whole new bunch of films to love. Basic Instinct, Fatal Attraction, Sliver. I like all those films, even though they're terrible. Whispers in the Dark is one of my favorite ones. Uh, so yeah, it sent me off in that direction, and also in the direction of like Henry, a serial killer, or a portrait of a serial killer, and things like, uh, in the '90s they did a whole lot of these movies, like The Hand That Rocks the Cradle and Unlawful Entry, and just on and on with these type of movies. And what they were was a template movie that they just kept redoing, and it would be like, there's someone in your life who's a psychopath that you have to deal with every day, and this is them. This is this version of that, and it would be, oh, your babysitter's a psychopath. Well, it's The Hand That Rocks the Cradle. Oh, the local cop is a psychopath. Unlawful Entry. It was always, like The Dentist. The Dentist is a psychopath. So they had a ton of those movies. It was always somebody that you knew in your life that for some reason you had to trust, a roommate, single white female, and they would always turn out to be crazy. I kept waiting that entire decade for a film called The Mailman. I thought they were going to have a mailman film. What if your mailman was crazy? That's somebody you got to deal with every day or every now and then. So, yeah, but I loved all those movies too, and I'm not putting them down. They spent hours and hours watching those movies. But other films too, like Copycat and things like that. Just really great '90s psychological thrillers. People don't call them horror films. I don't care what people call them. I love all those films. So, Just Cause, things like that. Great movies. And so I'm very appreciative of Silence of the Lambs for a lot of reasons. One of the reasons is it got me into reading Thomas Harris. I researched Thomas Harris, found out everything I could about him, and of course that the actual influence for or inspiration for Hannibal Lecter was Dr. Alfredo Bali Trevino, a Mexican psychopath, doctor and probable, I will say, serial killer. A great story there about him. If you ever get a chance, read that, how Thomas Harris met Dr. Alfredo Bali Trevino. And so yeah, just not only did I love it so much, and it's still one of my favorite films. You could ask me on Thursday and I'd say Silence is my favorite film. You could ask me on Saturday and I might say The Shining. You might ask me on Friday night when I'm drunk, and I might say Maximum Overdrive. That's the way it works with me. There's just too many at every single slot, right? One, two, three. I could put 5, 10 movies at each one of those places. But yeah, not only did I have a great love for it and still have a great love for it, but it also sent me off in so many new directions, and that's important. Now, the next thing I'm going to talk about is my dad. Yeah, we'll talk about him a little bit more because he had all these movies, and I knew he was a movie fan, and I talked about some of the movies that I thought he liked, and also stuff like Blazing Saddles. He was a Mel Brooks fan. He was a Woody Allen fan. I didn't like Woody Allen movies. I still don't to this day, so I wasn't too impressed by those. But I noticed that probably about the time I got 10 or 11, because he was doing it when I was younger, but I was too. It's not that hard to outsmart an 8 or 9 year old kid. It's not that smart in the first place. So, but yeah, when I was about 10 or 11, I guess around that era, I realized that occasionally somebody would come over and ask to borrow a movie, and my dad would slip off somehow into the bedroom and come back with it. And so it took me a little while to piece it together. I wasn't the brightest bulb, uh, but I figured out, yeah, he's got a separate collection in there somewhere. And so the first time I tried to just see what was going on, I remember trying to go in there while he was doing something or trying to get a movie or something, just so I could kind of see where he was going for what. And I noticed that he had in the corner next to his closet, he had a file cabinet, and the movies were in the file cabinet. So the first time I went, tried to steal one of these movies from my dad, I go in there, and he's gone, of course. I would never try this while he was home. But he was gone, and I go in there and try to open it, and it's locked. I mean, you'd have to have a key to get it open. And I'm like, damn, something's in there that's so great, and I want to see it. And so I went on, and this probably passed another 3 or 4 months before I tried it again. And I went in there one day just at random while he was gone and tried it, and the door slid right open. And folks, I can't tell you. Uh, I just remember, like, when I remember it, I kind of hear like angels singing and light shining from the drawer and things like that. It was Maniac and Scanners and the Texas Chainsaw Massacre and all these great films that were what I was talking about, where it's a human doing something to something. It's something I hadn't seen up until that point. Just so I started in on these movies, and yeah, it changed me. It changed me a lot. And I don't know if Dad knew, but I was always smart enough to, like, I would pick a window of time where I knew I could get a movie out, watch it, and put it back before he got home, and so I wouldn't ever get caught hanging with like the movies in the VCR and he walks in or something. Uh, and that only works for so long, because trust me, no matter how much you think you know your dad, he will come home for lunch one day, or he will come home because something's fixed that or happened in that day that you didn't realize. So yeah, I did end up getting busted eventually, but it was worth it, and I don't regret it one bit. And the funny thing is, like, every time I tell that story to people, or have told it in the past to a few people, every time I'll get to the part about my dad having a secret video collection, they go, "Oh yeah, it's porn, right? Porn." No, it wasn't porn. It was just a ton of great movies. He even had stuff like Hellraiser and Hellraiser 2 in there, and things that I never thought he watched, that I spent time sneaking around trying to see, because I didn't even know he had these movies. And so yeah, I always thought it was funny that people always assume that I'm talking about a porn collection when I get to that part. And even funnier, I'd say many, many moons later, I was about 25 years old. I was a police officer. And I was dating a woman who lived in St. Louis, but it was like the suburban area. It was a place I'd never been before, right? So I go up there, and I'm driving around, and I worked that day, so it was kind of, we had dinner, it's starting to get late. There wasn't much to do, and I said, "You want to go rent some movies?" That's always my suggestion. She's like, "Sure, we're young. I think we just really wanted to hang out or whatever. It didn't really matter what we were doing, but so we go to rent some movies, and I don't know where I'm at. I'm driving down this 4-lane highway, and I see a store off to, like, a store sign, and it says off the next exit is Dad's Video, Dad's Video Club. So I'm like, hey, that sounds like a decent place. Who? Oh yeah, I'm like, that sounds like a nice place or whatever, So we go over there, and it's a rather large building. We go through the front door, and there's a guy at a window. So just let that be a lesson to you right there, folks. If you ever see a guy at a window, if you're going to some place and there's a guy at a window, maybe think about it twice before you ask to go in. He asked how old we were. We showed him our ID, and I didn't understand that, but he said something about you needed a membership to rent videos there. Well, I understood that, so I was like, okay, so I paid for both of us to have a membership, and they come over and they buzz the door, and I'm like, what the? And when we walk in, yeah, Dad's Video Club was like the weirdest place I've ever been in my life. No offense to anyone out there for whatever you're into, but we walked in this place. There was like sadomasochistic porn on 4 or 5 different TVs. There were videos. They weren't the kind I was looking for though, and there were a lot of just giant dicks everywhere. That's what I remember the most. And not that I have a problem with anybody that enjoys any of that, but for me, at that moment in time, it was not exactly the place I wanted to be. And so yeah, we were extremely underdressed, or maybe I should say overdressed. Yeah, there were people walking around with other people on leashes and all that. I mean, I took all this in within about 30 seconds. And then I just turned around and I was like, okay. And we were both just laughing our butt off, and we walked out. And I mean, I didn't even try to get a refund for the memberships or anything like that. I was let's call it a day. So we just went back to the house and watched TV after that. And it was always funny because I guess when I saw it, it's like Dad's video stash or Dad's Video Club. I might have said Dad's Video Stash, in fact. And and I just thought, oh, yeah, that sounds cool because I remember finding my dad's video stash, and it was all like great movies like Maniac and man, just stuff that I would never forget seeing. And but no, his video stash was very different, and yeah. All right, guys, that's all we got for today. I'm gonna take a break on this one, and we'll be back in a couple weeks. We'll have part 3 of my horror story. I've seen so many horror movies, and I love to tell the story of the movies that I've seen. I've had a ton of great theater experiences, a ton of hilarious theater experiences because I used to go in large droves with my friends to the movies, and we would kind of like take over sections of the theater. And uh, I think a lot of those times I might have been the only one there that went to actually watch the movie. I think everybody else went to goof off and pass around schnapps in between us and stuff like that when we were young. But so yeah, I got a lot of great stories, and I love talking about them. So this is fun for me, and I hope you guys enjoyed listening. And if you didn't, you don't have to listen again. And we'll talk to you the next time we got something worth talking about. Bye.